Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 487, featuring Kevin Tod Haug, who has been a visual effects supervisor for a long time, a true legend in the industry, someone who's been a veteran for a long time. In fact, I was just thinking about the fact that in recent episodes, we've actually had three very important people who've done some incredible work, and you should almost listen to them as a series. So I would actually go back, listen to the Joel Hynek episode, as well as the Jeff Kleiser episode, and you guys will see that these guys have really been doing it for a long time. And in fact, the three episodes together would make a fantastic series. So let's just call it a great series of some legends of visual effects. But anyway, back to Kevin. He's been doing this for a while, and actually some of the famous movies he's worked on are Fight Club, The Cell, Panic Room, and really great stuff. And he talks a lot about that work, as well as collaborating with people like David Fincher and just generally how the visual effects industry is going. He has lots of thoughts about how AI is going to change things and what we're going to think about doing things in general, and how he has had to adapt to certain changes in the past, and how he feels with the lessons he's learned from those, and how he feels we can adapt for some of the lessons that are coming up in the future. So really cool stuff, and I really appreciate what Kevin had to say about that. Okay, we have a couple of announcements. As you guys know, we have a couple of product announcements. We know that Vantage 2 Update 5 is out, as well as Corona 12. Corona 12 also includes exports to Vantage, both of which involve real-time ray tracing. And speaking of real-time ray tracing, I want to let you guys know that there is a trailer that has come out last week. If you haven't seen it already, it is called Ray Tracing for the Win. Just look it up on YouTube. It is a short that I've been working on for a while. The short itself is not out yet, but the trailer is. It is a lot of fun. It is the first thing that we've ever done that involves Project Arena. I was a producer on it. I'm also acting in it, believe it or not. And it's really cool. So you get to see firsthand real-time ray tracing and the trailer, and then obviously the short will be coming out shortly after that. But if you are curious in actually seeing the short, and you happen to be in London this week, and you have signed up for the Rainbow Conference, then you are in luck. You'll be able to see a very early sneak peek at the actual short. Very excited about that. I won't, unfortunately, be in London, but Vlado will be, as well as Richard Crudo, who was the DP on it. Richard had actually been on the podcast itself, so excited about that. But yeah, it's really cool to be able to have Richard on to talk a little bit about his experience using Project Arena. I really appreciate it. So anyway, if you're at the Rainbow Conference, make sure and check that out. All of our events are listed at chaos.com/events. And the Rainbow is happening September 5th through the 6th. And then the premiere will be happening shortly after that. And then probably it'll be online. So you'll be able to see the short online in probably next few weeks or so. All right. Now, if you guys are interested in learning more about the podcast, including seeing more episodes with Jeff Kleiser and Joel Hynek, just go to chaos.com/CG Garage. That's where we list all of our podcasts. We also are on Facebook at facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast. If you'd like to watch the podcast, we post all our videos, including the podcast itself, at youtube.com/Chaos Group TV. If you have suggestions for other guests you'd like to have on, we always welcome those, and we have gotten several which we have made into episodes. labs@chaos.com is our email. Again, that is labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 487 with Kevin Tod Haug.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
It's amazing that I haven't had you on yet, because I've had a lot of incredible people on, and it's really kind of incredible that I haven't had you. But I'm glad you're here now, and I will definitely excited to talk to you, Kevin, about your career. So let's give people a little bit of an insight. Like, when did this all start for you? How did you sort of get into the film industry and visual effects and all of that stuff?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm a Southern California kid.
Okay.
So the film industry was an option. I was from Orange County. It wasn't exact, but there were film people around. It was a trade one could get into.
Sure.
So I was not like a kid from Ohio who thought it was magic. I always knew there were people like rips and electricians and whatnot who worked in the business, and that was interesting. So it wasn't that so much as it was. Well, I tell two stories basically. The first one was that my mother, once I could never quite explain what I did to my mother.
Right.
But at one point she went like, "Oh, you always did that." I mean, what do you mean? She said, "Well, we'd be watching the Flintstones and you'd point out that Fred was about to pick up the rock." And then he would. And of course, I'm thinking back and going like, well, that's probably because the cell levels were different and the rock looked different in the background. And anyway, but so she said, I always did this. And then the other one was that, I went to art school. I did a number of crazy things. I took too long to do everything.
Sure.
This was the first thing that held my attention for more than about 6 or 8 months. So, I did all sorts of, romantic sounding horrible jobs, like work on an auger boat, collecting seaweed. I did everything I thought was kind of cool sounding. Most of it was terrible. And this has the benefit of constantly reinventing itself. The visual effects business is a constant chase. You have to educate yourself. You have to pay attention to what's going on. You're always behind the curve.
Right.
You can get out there on the bleeding edge for like 4 seconds, and then you find yourself, somebody else has passed you and you didn't know it. So, and it's got that kind of thing like science, where you're building an edifice. There's visual effects is that part of filmmaking that's all about human perception. I mean, it's not exactly about storytelling, though it is. It's not exactly about creating images, but it is. One of my favorite books is what's her name, Margaret Livingstone. She wrote a book called Vision and Art, and it's all about how artists have always done this. Like Monet had it right. You just sort of sit in a nice, comfortable bourgeois existence and you work on what it is that makes things look like things.
Right.
And I've actually used Monet a few times, as a rule for how to make something happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that. But then let's see. I went to Cal Arts. I came out of Cal Arts, having made a movie on an optical printer. I understood. I also, because it took me a long time to graduate, I was also doing other things, and I had been at community college and learned how to program. COBOL, Fortran. I mean, this was early days. Punch cards.
Sure.
It didn't seem super practical, or that it was interesting without being practical or interesting.
Okay.
In a financially useful way. But then I got. I tried a number of things in the movie industry, and I was trying camera and whatnot. The unions were very hard in those days, and it was hard to kind of hook up. But I eventually worked for a guy named Bo Gehring, who was kind of a bleeding edge CG / whatever. The thing about visual effects at the time is it was going through a paradigm shift towards what eventually became the digital paradigm shift. But at the time it was. Motion control was the bleeding edge. Like
what year were we talking about approximately?
Oh God, early 80s.
Okay.
88. Yeah, I think it was like 80, 81, something like that. When I was,
gotcha.
And I think literally I was doing things in 73, 74 that sort of were commercially related. But I think really the moment when metal type and stuff like that started happening was. Doug Trumbull had done all that, but he was doing it analog. In 2001, there was all those things he did, short streaks and whatnot. And, on Star Wars, and I had a bunch of people I knew from Cal Arts who worked on Star Wars, they made the breakthrough where they had been doing the multi-pass stuff. Let's be honest, Méliès invented that, right? So they've been doing this 19th century kind of thing, and it was making people crazy because it was a joystick. Dykstra invented motion control. He took a joystick thing and he was able to sort of record the encoder data and do it over and over again. But you couldn't edit it. So one day, Paul from Lynx, who was working there, just, he took a long weekend and he cut all the cables and he hooked it up to his, it was probably a Mac E or something or other, whatever was available at the time, and actually managed to figure out how to send those signals in an editable way. And that really, that was the big deal, but nobody got it at the time. It was just like, multipass, how cool. But it spurred a very short-lived, crazy industry, mostly here in LA, of motion control guys who were doing graphics. And I was working at first for Bo, doing like Harry Mark's crazy stuff. Actually, do you do sharing on a thing like this?
Yeah, you can share screen, actually. Okay. So if you look at the bottom, it's a share screen and it'll record it and we can put it right in the video podcast. Okay.
So I had this all set up and then we crashed and burned. That's okay. Let me see if I can pull it up while we're talking. But the time tunnel thing from 2001 was literally done the way Disney did Cinderella. It was like very, very, very analog. Whereas by the time I was doing it for Bo, we had computers, but I was still literally programming. I had to do go subroutines that open the shutter, close the shutter, turn on the lights, all that stuff was very, very mechanical, but it was a robot doing something. And the actual computer generated images, this was the time when nobody knew how to get them onto a useful distributable medium of some kind. I mean, honestly, the big paradigm shift is when people came up with files that held images. The TIFF file revolutionized our whole industry, and nobody really quite gets it. Like series of TIFF files blew everybody's mind when it finally happened. Now you don't even really think about file structures and whatnot being important, but they were critical. But I mean, we've been have this
old is new again all the time, right? Like in Camo VFX, it's just basically just rear projection.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was funny listening to Jeff. It was kind of horrifying and interesting at the same time because he was talking about doing optical printer stuff, and I was doing exactly the same thing except for a downshooter, right? So that he was pointing it at a monitor. Bo came up with this crazy idea to up the resolution of everything. I mean, we were working at 720, but the resolution of what ended up in Tron was shit. The only thing that got it looking halfway decent was the process of getting it to film, up-resed it, and Bo understood that. And so he didn't use television screens because that was a raster and you knew you were going to get moire patterns and stuff that you had to get rid of. He used a plotter. A plotter, in this case, it's big rolls of vellum. It can be hard paper, but we needed vellum. It was as transparent.
I used to be an architect, so I know exactly what a plotter is.
Okay. Mylar was a possibility, but the ink never stuck to Mylar well, so he gave up on it, and he used vellum. And so, had these pens that ran back and forth over the top of it that were generated in CG.
It's a vector file that literally bzz, 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 bzz. Yep.
It literally. And so he would do this, and it would come out with a box that was the exact proper ratio with the image in it. 24 frames a second. And then you would cut those out and you give them to these little ladies and they would tape them up onto Mylar cells and put, the reinforcers on them and tape them all down and make sure they're all lined up and give them to me. And I would go into a dark room and put them at the bottom, on top of a projector and did contact prints onto Codalith stock and then gave it back to the ladies who then laid it all up. And so you ended up with bright, clear lines on black film, which was really bad for my knees and smelling chemicals and crap. And it took weeks to generate one image at a time, cell size, 12 field cell size. And then you would stick it on a light box and you'd stick diffusion or whatever you wanted over the top of it and put color filters in front of the lens and do wedges. I remember Jeff talking about wedges. It almost made me anxious. No, because wedges is one of these things that could literally take weeks. I had to train people eventually so I wouldn't die. I can remember one night working at a place called Lumini where a fly came in and landed on a frame, and I knew I'd shot it. You know, it was like buzzing around and it had been bothering me all night. And I was looking at the artwork and it landed on it and I heard the camera go open. It was like, fuck. And I called the owner and we had the conversation at 3 a.m. about what should we do. And he said, finish, because you were 3/4 of the way through, and we'll go back and we'll reproduce that frame. And I said, but there's 12 passes on that frame.
Oh,
so
no.
yeah, we'll figure out a way to do it. He said, but they're going to edit it in. These guys don't. We did. I think we actually, because it was the only way to finish in time.
Right.
You know, when I was working for Bo, I was down in the marina, and I could remember doing these. I called them 48-hour days, where I didn't go home. You know, I just sat there and watched the machine do its thing. Heavy metal had these short stroke streaks. They were the bright lines that needed to be made into dimensional things, and you did that by working out basic trig. And said if the
you mean heavy metal?
Backwards,
do you mean the animation heavy metal?
Yeah. The title sequence of Heavy Metal had some metal type on it that we did at Garand.
Yes,
and it had a fallback where the metal type was revealed with what we call short stroke streaks. And so instead of going out to infinity, the streaks looked like dimension.
Sure.
Like you had a clear box on the back of it.
Yeah.
And that was just done by smearing a bright line through the frame, right? But how you did that was the trick. You had to do it in a certain way so that it looked like it was geometry.
Sure.
But it all needed to be in focus, and it needed to start really close to camera. It had to end up back there in 12 fill center, and it had to be this dark red. Okay, well, dark red was if I remember correctly, a 23A filter or maybe a 25 Ratten filter, which sucked up all the light. And in order to hold it in focus, we did what we called we'd stop it down to what we call pinhole. We had these old Mitchell lenses that would go down to like f/16 or something. But if you just kept going in that direction, if you took the stops off, the blades of the iris would crash, and there would be a pinhole left. And that was what you could use to be. We would smash the lens right up against the artwork, literally, and it would pull away. So we didn't have to start with a long lens. The artwork was made just bigger than the physical lens, and it would pull back and immediately start to show you the artwork. And these streaks would take forever. Literally, they were half an hour a frame at the beginning. Yeah,
because you're super long exposure because you had it stop down so far.
And because I was literally programming it to do all this, I would actually, I programmed it to open the shutter, close the shutter, move, close, open, move, close, come back to A, get ready to go to B. And so because I had this was also animating, so I had to flop the cells. So I set it up to send a signal to a power strip. And basically turn on the power strip. And into the power strip was plugged the lights and a radio. And I would hit, I'd be all set up. I'd put the artwork up, tape it, get it ready. The light box would start moving back down the track. The camera stood still and the artwork moved away from it. And I, would like, okay, do push. I would hear it go click. Everything would start to move. And I would sleep. And then the radio would come on and the lights would come on and I would go, okay, and it would be coming back to me. And I would get the artwork out and I would peel it off and put it back on again and go back again for, a day, literally,
right.
In a dark room by myself. So, now I'm literally trying to explain this to people who don't even really understand film.
Sure.
Let alone, how this all works out. It's literally, kind of frightening. So yeah, listening to Jeff talk about the same thing, except for he was doing, actually on a monitor. Eventually I was doing that too at the post group. I was actually at the post group. It was being done at Pack Title, a place that doesn't
Pack Title, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Two names of places that don't exist anymore.
No, legendary though. Was it Pablo? Wasn't he over at Pack Title?
No, at the time it was like Phil Feiner. I mean, we're talking 80s, right? And we were shooting on very high resolution little monitors, and we were shooting color seps. We would do the red channel, blue channel, the green channel, and send that over to Pack Title and put in an optical printer. And it was like, ooh, these are the days when SIGGRAPH electronic theater was about literally, ooh, how did they get something onto film? It was like,
Right.
ooh, that was the cool thing. You would come out and the buzz on the floor would be, did you see the orange? It was really reproducing orange.
Right. Well, it's interesting, let's talk a little bit about that, because obviously there's been several transformations in the industry that really has a good SIGGRAPH is a really good reflection of that, right? Because if you look at the early days of SIGGRAPH, it was like, how the hell did you figure it out, right? And that was one of the things that happened, and obviously all these academic papers and everything that was happening, which is still the most important part of SIGGRAPH to me, is the research part of it, right? But then there was that moment, right? There was that moment in the 90s, late 90s or so, where it just became about the money. It became about the SGIs and the huge parties and all this It was the .com explosion, right? Yeah. About that time that was so important, and then it wasn't, the research was kind of like the background that was still happening, as opposed to the giant $1 million booths that were at the SIGGRAPH part on the floor. Sure. So, and that's changed, obviously. I think now what's interesting is that while SIGGRAPH is sort of toned down from those days in the 90s, the research is still very, very, very important and really interesting, especially now. Like, there's another revolution happening that's not so quietly happening, and SIGGRAPH is the only place to find out what's the reality of that.
Well, it is interesting. I mean, actually, I'm interested in your take on this, because I'm absolutely convinced that another very big paradigm shift is happening as we speak. And there was the electro-mechanical, if you will, that is where I entered, and then there was the digital paradigm shift.
So first of all, I haven't heard the term electromechanical part of it, but that's exactly right. Yeah, like that was so interesting how that happened. Yeah. People like yourself. Gray Marshall was also part of, was doing some interesting stuff in that time. That was awesome. And then, like you said, the digital stuff, like how that was interesting. But sorry, keep going.
No. It because in that day, it was like Doc Bailey, very close friend of mine. He was a motion control guy. And he got into CG, and he became the doctor because he could figure out how to make something happen. Almost everything that he made happen now is just kind of like a button on somebody's software. But SIGGRAPH was a place to exert an exchange of ideas for a while, and it was very software oriented. But like, I entered the world where hardware was still where it happened, and software was in support. I mean, essentially, we were doing, if Méliès had little motors, he'd be doing what we were doing 100 years before us, right? But he didn't have little motors, so we got to do that. And then it was when the actual generating an image in the computer and being able to put that onto something you could display. Film was the big deal at the time, but that wasn't really the issue. It was that, how do you show that to people? Right. And now SIGGRAPH is, I have to say, in the last few years, I used to go to NAB all the time, back when tape formats were the thing. And then I kind of got bored with it because software was where things are at. And then I got bored with SIGGRAPH because software was kind of not where things were at anymore. And in fact, I think what's happening right now is that what happened, when you're talking about the big parties and all that kind of stuff, was that there was this moment where it was finally possible to monetize what we were doing. It was desperately hard to do, and it was kind of expensive, and then it got really expensive. And somebody figured out how to make real money at it, and it kind of blew up and got us where we are. Can't argue with that, but it also changed the whole filmmaking paradigm. From my point of view, when I entered this, you entered into that feudal system that is the filmmaking, like the prince, the director is the prince, and we're all like, dukes and duchesses and barons of the industry. And then there's the peasants and merchants that, you have to reach out to, and the studio is the Pope. And, it's like, it really feels like the 17th century. And, but that got kind of messed up when the power of the merchants, the vendors, who are essentially mirror image of production companies. right? They produce 5-second movies, but they, basically that's what they do. And that kind of flopped it. Like I was always working for the prints, and slowly but surely that became not the way you do it, because, the big vendors with all the money and all the ability to sort of skew things towards the way it made easier for them to make money and not lose all their people and not go under every 3 years. I mean, to be honest, you got to give them credit. They fixed that. It used to be that no vendors survived longer than 3 years.
Right.
It just never did. And now, there have been people around for not just ILM anymore. There's a lot of companies that have been around a long time.
Yeah. It's true. It's true.
But it also changed that relationship. Now they want to talk directly to the prints, but they don't want to get too close. They don't want to have that responsibility of actually working for him. You want to, So I think what's happening is that the technology has moved so far that we're now looking. Virtual production is one of those crazy things like stereo 3D. It really was misunderstood by the people who thought they could make a lot of money off of it. But it has changed our world in a lot of ways. And the real-time aspect of it, the fact that the director can see things earlier on and have power over them and all this kind of... I think this is the big news. I think we're moving back to interesting hardware in support of, software.
Interesting.
Anyway, I mean, I just made a movie in Italy. The combination of pandemic and working for, an Italian movie for an Italian audience that, literally that means they don't have the money. Right. I mean, there's no market to justify millions of dollars in visual effects. And we did what something for like an order of magnitude less than it should have cost. Right. And the only reason we did it is because all these ideas have been bouncing around. Lots of people have been talking about it. I've been at FMX and doing with friends and trying to, say, well, why don't we do it this way? Wouldn't this be a better way to do that? How about optimizing it? Well, we got to do all those things. We got to do all of them. And we really did save a lot of money and do it a lot faster. It's like they say, you can have it good, you can have it fast, you can have it cheap, but you have to pick two. We didn't pick two. We picked three, and we kind of got it. We did it in less time than we should have, at least in post. Sure. Probably had 2.5 years in prep, but we knocked it out in post, and we did it for literally 1/10 of what it ought to cost, and it looks pretty good. I'm not going to go. It looks great, because there's limits to what you can do, but it looks better than most of what I see out there. So I'm not proud of it. And we had, but we were using hardware to push us along. We were leaning on production to get us what we needed. And we found a way to make that work. I mean, the best example, there's lots of things, but for me, the main thing was that USD and metadata will change the world that we're in right now. The fact that we could do previs, and the things that we were doing in previs, whether they were in Unity or in Unreal or in Maya, were assets that we could bring to set and show the director. And the whole VP paradigm, we didn't have a wall. We couldn't afford it. It probably would have broke anyway, because we were out in the elements. We'd have destroyed a wall. But we could show it to the director on the screen. He could see where the horizon line was. This is a submarine movie. And, so there was nothing to track because you could never see the submarine. You only can see the guys running around top of it. Sure. And we were, we needed to replace the ocean. So we needed to do the ocean in something like 35 minutes of the movie. And daytime, nighttime, sea battles, airplanes, all the things. All had to be done, with on an Italian budget, in a very short period of time. We had to get it out for the Venice Film Festival. It took at least another month off our schedule. And we were able to do it because we were able to track it on set. Which is sort of like going to the punchline. But the fact is that we used Cook lenses and some very cool aggregator boxes that took the encoders off the cameras and the rigs, which is, how do I put this? This is where we started, right? I was sitting in a dark little room with little motors that could, I could tell what to do. And now what we're doing is the operator is spinning the handles and it's generating these little numbers. And there's somebody, some very smart guys in Bordeaux who are grabbing that data and aggregating it with data that's coming from a Cook lens and putting it all together in a little file and handing it to Unreal and changing the Unreal image in less than a 50th of a second, which means it's real time, and you can see it on a screen. I mean, it took a few seconds to go through the video chain to get it back to the director, but that happens to the image coming out of the camera, frankly. So it was as fast as it could be delivered to the director.
Yep.
You could see a mix of what ought to be back there and what was there. And this was with anamorphic lenses, right? Which up until, fairly recently, not that recently, when I worked on Quantum of Solace, I got into a familiar, sort of familial spat with the DP right in front of Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson about the use of anamorphic on this movie. And it's like, no, Roberto, they don't have time. You don't understand. We don't have time for that. And he's like, oh, but it's a big movie. We should be using anamorphics. I hear you. But, we're going to have 3 months in post. He's like, ooh, he didn't care. That's the problem. But now we had buy-in from the director. The DP wanted to use anamorphic lenses. We suggested he uses Cooks. He says, I love Cooks. If we can afford Cooks, let's have Cooks. And Cooks have metadata that streams off of them natively, and we were able to capture it, tell Unreal to warp itself to look like the lens and put it back in front of the camera. The director could see it. Better yet, we were able to take that information and hand it to post, where they didn't have to track the shot. It was tracked. They just had to pull it down and do it, which meant we had dailies. We didn't often see them. We were shooting 6 days a week, and it was very hard to convince the director to come in to see 2 or 3 shots a week that, weren't finished. So we didn't do a lot of dailies, but something like 40 or 50 times we actually had something that had gone up to the pipe and actually been done in 2K and came back to be seen, while we were still shooting. And, frankly, we could do better now. So
I should tell you about Project Arena, because this is exactly a problem we're solving.
I mean, I know this is an interview, but I would love to hear about it. Actually, what Vantage is doing with what Chaos is doing with Vantage is super interesting to me.
That's Project Arena. So Project Arena is essentially our real-time. We're taking Vantage and we're utilizing it to basically go into virtual production scenarios. So it's basic. We bypass all the need for conversion and we fully ray trace the whole time. So your anamorphic is just like anything else. It's just fully ray traced.
Yeah. And basically getting back from Cook at this point is that they've calibrated all the lenses in advance. And, so long as they
you just take that data and you convert.
And the data just streams off and it's frame by frame. It's amazing what it looks like. I mean, if anybody remembers the first time they saw something automatically tracked, I think it was Computer Film Company put a logo on a brick wall. And I was like, oh God, the world has changed. I'll never see a hand track again. This is perfect. It's the same thing. When you start to see focus change and the shifting, the distortion around the edges in perfect sync with the actual lens, we all thought it was fine what we were doing, but it's not when you see what you can do.
Yeah.
So
interesting. Well, you did go through a transition from the electro-mechanical, as you call it, to digital. So what was that transition like? And when did it sort of happen for you? When did you sort of notice it?
Well, I mean, let's see, I came out of doing motion control stuff. I went to the post group. Because I was a motion control guy. And the post group was a very bleeding edge kind of post facility for TV commercials and stuff. They had telecine. They had all these things that eventually morphed into the DI. And I was at the digital center where they had Harry's and the graphic paint box. I mean, all these bleeding edge crazy tools that we were working on TNG. And just before I got there, they were doing Max Headroom. And Quantum Leap and all these kinds of things that were happening at the time. It was like for television. And there was a couple of great things about that. You didn't actually have to go to film, right? And film was still an issue. So we didn't have to do that. And we were able to work at, ridiculous resolution, 720. I mean, but we were doing everything. And so I was the motion control guy for a while at this facility. And then I slowly got to see other things. I remember it was very, very lucky for me because I'd spent all these years thinking in a very particular way about, like, this is the image and it moves through the frame, paranoia surrounding whether you're on the right frame or not, and getting into this sort of digital world where things were already in sync and already working. You could, and so I became the guy who did. I think Michael Levy called me a high-level utility. I had the motion control camera, I had the A64, I had the Mirage, I had all the weird things that nobody knew how to use.
Sure.
I learned how to use them, and then they would call me in. I would often be in a bay before they were about to do some big music video or something, hammering away on the Mirage, trying to make sure that the cloaking and uncloaking of a Klingon was going to be, on when they went to do it. Because it was such a finicky machine. We actually had two of them, and the second one was just there for parts. When something didn't work, we just went to the other one, ripped it out, put it in, and hoped that it would work this time. And I can remember, like, doing that kind of thing and having people look at me. Once I looked up and Prince had entered the room before everybody else, and he was just staring at me. It was kind of like, it's like, no, I should be behind the wall. I know, thank you. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
But and from there I started doing series, and that got me supervising, and it also got me out of the world of trying to keep up of actually creating the images and thinking about how they ought to be for this show at this time. And that's how I got to be a supervisor. I mean, I was actually programming, robots, and then I was programming the Mirage, which was a real-time graphics thing that was way ahead of its time. And that's a lot of hard work. And the results are, there's a thing to learn when you're freelance, especially in visual effects, because things change so often, is that like, if you ever watched a pod of surfers, there's a bunch of them sitting out there, and wave comes in and they try it out. And even the really good guys catch a good wave, and they get off of it before it's done, right? Nobody goes into the beach unless they're going home. You catch that wave, and it's so much fun that you take it all the way on the beach. You have to paddle all the way back out.
Yeah.
And that's this business. By the time you paddled out, you're fucked, right? No, but if you were the guy who used to work on the Harry, right? You have to reinvent yourself. And so it's better to surf it, to get off, to try the next one, see what's coming next. Don't get bogged down. But in order to be good at what you do, you have to kind of get bogged down. So I learned not to do that. And that was that was partly just because I was at a place where, the post-group things flowed through us. We saw everything come in. Right. I think it's like people who worked at ILM or whatnot. They got the same thing. This stuff was there. The only difference was that the post-group things happened fast. And most people don't remember your mistakes because nobody ever looks back at that stuff. So it was fine to just tear ahead. But so I worked on a couple of music videos and a few things like that, and eventually I got onto a series. And somewhere along the way, I started picking up, as one does, you start picking up your crew. In freelance world, they don't actually work for you. They're the people that you call upon so they help you look good when the time comes. And I'd met Mike Fink. I'd worked with Propaganda, and one day Mike called me in to work with him on a music video for Mark Romanek, and then Mike went off to do Braveheart, and I finished it, and then I was working for Propaganda a lot. And from Propaganda, I'd met Sion Chafin. I started working for Fincher. I did 3 movies for Fincher, and then and now I was a movie guy. So it's So it's why you can't explain this stuff to students. They say, how'd you get into the business? Well, I didn't get into the business. I did this job, and then I did that job, and I met these people. I met Dr. Bailey. I met David Stump. I met, Sion Chafin. These things changed my life, and, they were, hopefully I helped them get where they went, Like Fight Club, the things we did on Fight Club. Oh my God. We actually had a beauty contest for vendors to see if they could come up with something better than giant refrigerators to shoot motion control under. Right, like that was a real possibility. If you want to get in a refrigerator, you build a macature, right? You build a 10 times scale bottom of a refrigerator, and you'd fly underneath it, and that would look cool. But Fincher already knew he didn't really like that. And I said, you're going to want to make changes, and you shoot miniatures. I'd shot enough miniatures to know that when you shoot miniatures, everybody hates it later because you're stuck. It's like any other production. What you shoot is what you get. And he liked to twiddle, and he still does.
Right.
He loves post much more than production. And so we were trying out CG, and I think we had 5 or 6 vendors show up at a stage at Fox. Can you imagine this? We had the money to take a stage at Fox and put a stove on it. It was actually a stove from my rental unit. And people came in and they shot pictures of it, or not, or whatever they're going to do. And then they went off into tests, and they came back and said, what do you think? We really had months to do this kind of thing. And I haven't had that experience again until 2 years ago in Italy with this pandemic, and their minds are bleeding from not doing anything, and they're ready to take their best ideas and throw them at this little Italian film,
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. Obviously, Fight Club was an iconic film in a lot of ways. How did you get onto that? I mean, what was?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously through your connections.
I've been working in propaganda. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean that's how it goes. It's like I had done a couple of commercials there for a few of the directors. Sion had called me in to work on the game, right? And it was a good experience, and so she called me when Fight Club started.
Right.
Yeah. It's it's not like you apply. There weren't a bunch of people trying to do the movie. There was never anybody but me. Yeah. So.
Yeah, those are interesting. Like, especially things like what he had been working with the guys at Booth, I guess, who had been doing some interesting work, right? So.
Well, yeah. I mean, another person that changed my life. Hopefully, I was a good effect on his, but it was Pierre Buffin. Yeah. We it was Fight Club. I remember going up to Mount Olympus where they had some guys embedded. They were working on the poison ivy stuff and the ice for Batman.
Oh, right.
And so I was here in LA, and I could just go up there, and I met Chicho.
Mm-hmm.
Pierre wasn't around, and we met their guys, and it all got started because Fincher had seen some things that Michel Gondry had done, and he wanted that, right?
Sure.
So we went up there to talk to them, and in the end, the Matrix had sort of happened, and we started realizing who they were, and changed everything. I mean, it's funny when you think about it. At the time, I realized that what Pierre was doing, which basically was photogrammetry, was a much smarter way of doing things than what we've been doing. That would be much easier for this director to see earlier and understand what he was getting. Yeah, and so I think on Fight Club we did one full CG, full ray traced thing. One.
That was the thing that was sort of important about them. I mean, obviously, I remember what the flea scene from City of Lost Children, and then they did obviously Panic Room as well. That whole sequence into that whole area, which I think you were involved in as well, and then Fight Club. And so it was the first time where people were like, "Oh, why does it look so good?" It's like, they ray traced it.
Well, we ray traced one thing. Mostly the reason it looked good is because we were actually using photogrammetry textures.
Yes, I didn't mean to diminish it in that way.
No, I mean, the highlights were ray traced, but the textures were not. And there was that whole thing about how to generate those. I mean, Pierre had done a little bit of it on commercials. The scope for Fight Club was big, But he was having so much more fun on Fight Club than he'd had on Batman. I think they hated Batman for some reason. I don't know why.
Right.
I mean, I thought the work looked pretty good, but there was something about it.
Sure.
Like going under the refrigerator, for instance, all these textures. Some of them were actually reflective, and they had to ray trace those, right? But mostly we picked them to be textures that you could live with what had been photographed, and that was an interesting thing. The sport fucking sequence, we had to shoot bodies, and so they're not CG bodies; they're mostly photo texture bodies. We actually tried to create the motion blur in camera and then turn it into an object. I mean, we really leaned into photogrammetry. I think in the end, Pierre made those. He was smart. We were moving around it, and he didn't want to create an object out of the motion blur. He created the motion blur in CG, but he kind of lied and went ahead and let us use it. It was a great reference.
Amazing.
But we had a camera set up. Paul, again from Lynx, the guy who invented, motion control files that could be edited, brought in camera setup. So we had 2 cameras set in a matrix along the path of the camera, and one shot off a very, very fast, like 250th of a second still camera, and then one right next to it did a half second, so that it would be super blurry. And at the end of the half second, the other one went off again. So we had sharp at the beginning and end, and then we had blurry. I think in the end, Pierre just used the blurry as reference, but we thought, if you get enough of that, you're going to be able to create an object because it's from all these angles, right? And the object will be made from real motion blur, and you could do it.
Interesting.
He was smarter than that, but it was.
Yeah.
That's why at least I do it. I do it because I'm trying to do something that no one's ever done before. Even if it's not necessarily going to look different, it's a better way to do it or a cooler way to do it.
I think the experience of being a visual effects artist is mainly about doing things that people haven't seen before. And that's the most interesting part of it. If we keep doing the same thing over and over again, that's fine. But if you're doing something that no one's ever seen before, that's great. Or if you do something that people don't realize that what you've done is there, which is the least rewarding in some ways, but the most rewarding. Like if you didn't know that was VFX. Right. That's awesome.
It's gotten less so. I mean, it's gotten to the point where I have to look at things to know what I'm seeing.
Sure.
When I was a kid, I went to movies to analyze them. See, they did that, and how did they do that? And I could tell the shots. Now,
well, your mom was telling you were doing that, like you said. Right?
Yeah. I can remember Forrest Gump. I was going in there and going like, "Oh God, this guy is great. Look what he did. He probably put that back in and he did that over there." And but I can't tell now. I don't know what technique they used. So,
yeah. Well, what do you think about now? I mean, like what like you said, you don't know how it's done, and it's not necessarily our responsibility to try to figure out how to unsolve every puzzle, right, or to dissect it.
No. I mean, it used to be. Of course, you were all alone, right? And everybody's secretive, and so you had to figure out what they did so you could do it, right?
Right.
Now, everybody's pretty much willing to talk. I mean, like I said, it's become more like the scientific community. People are happy to tell you how they did it.
Sure.
Because you can't hide the sun behind your thumb for very long, so it's
Yeah.
But it is, that's another one of those things. It's like it used to be, black magic, back in the 50s, people, hid their, they would throw blankets over the optical printer so nobody knew what they were doing.
Right.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about like where we're going now? Because obviously, there, like you said, you believe that there's another paradigm shift that's happening, and I also believe that. Maybe to it, I don't know if that's the same reason you do. But what are your thoughts about how things are changing and where this is going?
Well, I mean, there's other things, but I mean, like what I see in our business, and there'll be external factors that'll probably change everything. But the main thing I see is like there's a whole generation of directors who were essentially taught by the studios and by the big vendors that visual effects is really not theirs. And there's this backlash of hating visual effects. Why? Because directors
they don't control
get to direct them, and somebody else is doing it. So what?
And that's why they keep like saying CG's bad. We didn't use any CG in this. It's all in camera.
As if. I mean, come on.
I know it's all
because
a
they
lie.
didn't make those decisions, and they don't feel in control of it. And often they're a little bit too lazy, I hate to say it, or just too busy.
But it's also a marketing scheme, because there's an audience out there that like wants to believe that it's all done in camera.
Actually, I don't even believe that's true. I think that is old men in advertising trying to convince themselves of something that isn't true.
Okay.
I mean, honest to God, I think nobody knows how advertising works anyway. I mean, it's basically just money down a rat hole, and you don't know if it succeeded or not because you really don't know. And so if you start convincing yourself that, well, if we tell people that these stunts were actually done with a CG guy, well, you know, what are we going to do? Well, I mean, why do you think superheroes wear masks? So they can be all CG. Come on. Yeah, it's, oh, God. No, that's all just silly as far as I'm concerned. Sure. But I mean, on a practical level, remember the feudal system. You know, you got the prince and his people, right? You know, sure. They're powerful people. You know, the DP is like a duke. He's got his own realm. He's almost as famous as some directors. You know what I mean? You can get on a movie where you have a more famous DP than director, and that's, you know, there's this tension. And what are you going to do? You're going to tell this guy, when he gets to the Oscars and he looks up at the stuff he did, and 2/3 of the stuff that they show on the screen are visual effects shots that he didn't even shoot the plates for, you know, they hate it.
You mean like Avatar?
Just hate it. well, you know, anything. Pick a movie where you suddenly see airplanes and cars going by and stuff, and it's all CG because it's fun to look at, right? And the poor guy, he broke his back trying to make the leading lady look particularly good on a short lens. And God knows that's an art form that I don't know how anybody gets there, but he did it. Yep. And nobody wants to show that at the Oscars, you know. So anyway, so you have to give production a reason why they want to be involved, and they haven't been given one in a long, long time. The directors acquiesce to letting the studios take the visual effects away from them and send them off to vendors. But I feel like this whole real-time thing is kind of like the DI. The DI was a subtle but fundamentally earth-shattering development. And like typically, like all paradigm shifts, it started out as us lying to the producers that if they shot in 2perf, they'd save a lot of money. But in fact, of course, then they couldn't cut the negative, so they were forced into going into a DI. Right. You know, and in the end, so one day I don't have to do that anymore because we're just going to the DI, and it's this great thing, and we can do visual effects in there. Did you know that?
Kind of.
Yeah, in the most stupid, expensive way you can possibly imagine.
The most expensive way to fix it in DI is,
Yeah. So, but that thing, you know, where if you can find a reason for the keys, the leads on a movie other than the director, particularly the director, to see a buy-in, to see a reason why they want this to happen. And the only place it's going to happen is in prep and production, because you lose the production designer at the end of production, just like you lose the DP. Yeah. And as budgets get smaller, the editor doesn't start to show up until actually you're shooting, which means nobody gets to meet him anyway. And so if you don't get those keys bought into your process, you're always an outsider.
That's one thing I think is wrong. Right. I don't think you should lose your DP. I don't think you should lose your artists, your concept artists, and your production designers at the. And so the first time it ever happened to me was on Tron. Right. I was working on Tron, and that movie was long shot. Right. But I sat next to David Levy, who was designing the arena for the light bike sequence, and he was working with me on how are these lights going to look, how are we going to get the floor to reflect correctly, and it was this awesome experience of actually having the creative on with me and making decisions on set. And I think that's really important. And then to your point as well, I mean, I just finished working on this short film, which is the first thing we've done with Project Arena. And Richard Crudo was our DP, right? And so Richard has been doing this for a very long time, but he loved it. He was like, you know, the biggest problem I always have is like, I shoot it and I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know what's going to happen. And now when you're actually presenting, you're putting the CG behind on camera, then it's on me. It's on me to make it look good. It's not like, I don't know, they did it later. Like I now take responsibility for how this looks, which is what a DP should be doing, right? The DP
Right,
should be there as like, it is correctly exposed. It is exactly the focal length that I want. It is, the lighting is coming from the direction that I want it to come from, or I think it should come from. And so I think
it has the quality I want it to have, and the depth of field. They're so worried about the background, and you've removed the background from their ability to do anything with it.
Right.
I mean, half of what a DP has to worry about is what's behind the subject, right?
I
when
know.
you take it away, what have you done to their life, right?
Well, I mean, I'll talk a little bit. I'll preview this a little bit. But then this short film we did, it's done as a Western, and we wanted to shoot it very much like an old school spaghetti Western, right? And so Richard used these Panavision lenses, which were the vintage P lenses, which were literally the old speed glass stuff, right, from the 70s, and the background's out of focus. I'm wearing someone's wearing a cowboy hat, and the fringing on it has got the beautiful vintage chromatic aberration around it. And the background is bright and creating it's like, you're not going to get that if I threw a big green screen behind a person. You would never get that quality. And so it looks so much more authentic because it's all in camera. At the same time, all of the digital decisions are still being made, right? We're still creating the digital sets. I didn't build an entire village behind them. I still was able to be flexible. So it was kind of beautiful that it all kind of worked as a decision in camera. So
no, and production designers as well. I mean, there's always an argument about waste that you can take to the line producer. I mean, line producers are kind of the enemy, right? Because
unless you get a good one.
Well, if the real producer is more likely to go there than the line producer, because the line producer's job is essentially get the movie greenlit and deliver it on budget, right? So if that's really what drives him, if you start adding stuff that he has to deal with in prep and production, you're making his life more difficult, right? You're also asking him to spend more money up front, so he has less control over delivering on budget. It's really hard to get buy-in from a line producer unless they're actually the producer and they look down the road and they see what it's going to mean to the movie. And frequently convincing the producer himself to make the line producer do what you want is a great way to make an enemy. Right. So getting buy-in, getting that they understand how this is helping them as well is the trick. But I feel like this is all beginning to happen. I've like on Comandante, the movie I'm talking about, Ferran, the DP, he was scared to death I was going to tell him he couldn't use anamorphic, and I said, no, please, we wanted to use anamorphic on this movie, and he was like, really? So no, you tell me what you want it to look like, and then we can show you something on set. We can do now, nothing the first time you do it lives up to what you think it ought to be, but a piece of what we intended to do happened on everything. And in the end, my favorite moment on the whole thing was we were doing some testing, and Timothée, the guy from Bordeaux who's got the aggregator box, who we were taking metadata from a Technocrane and from a Fisher Dolly. We're pulling all that in so that we could have everything. I mean, not just the lens, but everything. And he, has a little blue box that needs to fit on the back of the camera. And then you're making the camera heavy, no problem. And you can already feel the operator and the focus puller and the AC, they're all, I don't know about this guy. And we did a couple of things, and it was all kind of beginning to click. And I remember Ferran walking over and bringing his crew together, and I said, I think now that we see this, we realize that Timothée needs to be one of those people who can approach the camera. And they were all like, And I watched it happen. I watched a visual effects guy run over there without warning people and without getting like a dispensation from the Pope in order to walk next to the camera, go over there and play with the wires, and the AC would come over and hand him something and bring, and we'd all get it done together.
Sure.
And I looked at that and said, well, someday that job's going to be done by a camera guy. But for now, they recognize the value of it. Right. And so they're on it. They're helping. And they got to see some of these dailies. I mean, they got to see more of the dailies than the director in some cases. Director felt his weekends were sacrosanct. Some of the group members You know, they didn't
Right.
get to go home, so they were happy to look at dailies.
Mm-hmm.
But I also like art direction. I mean, I feel like what I do is very akin to what the production designer does, except for I have to deliver it, you know, after the editor goes. So, but
Right.
he or she will have a very clear idea of what they want to see. They're responsible for everything you see on the set that isn't attached to an actor. And so it's great to be able to say, okay, you're already working in digital. I want your SketchUp models and I want to put them into previs.
Right.
And so I want your guys to get on this and work with the previs guys. And USD now makes this possible, that like sort of resolution independent.
You can do Advantage too. Just go straight from SketchUp to screen in 5 minutes.
Right, and that, you know, goes to screen, and then you're able to see it on set.
Sure.
You know, and you know, we were doing lighting. We didn't do a lot of it on this movie. We had one place where we needed to do it, but you know, DMX is a piece of cake, right?
Sure.
I mean, this is practically audio, and we, you know, you can send a picture from your Unreal scene out to the lights, and you know, have the lights driven by that. And anyway, we settled on something. We couldn't do blue, we couldn't do green, we couldn't do LED walls, partly for money, partly because, well, you know, everybody was wet.
Sure.
You know, it was too far away. You know, you couldn't do it. And we settled into what we called similar screen. We shot night for night, we shot day for day. And we used Copycat to separate things out. And sometimes we used good old traditional roto that got us close enough that Copycat could do the composite in a better way. Right? And it looked great. And this was another thing that the DP could see. It was like, see, that's, you know, you're looking at a black background. Yeah, there's a city in it. You know, we shouldn't have the city back there, but it's still the sky. How are you going to separate them from the sky? You can see it. Tell me what you want it to look like. And, you know, it's night for night is hard. Right. And you need to put something back there. And he had something to play with. And the same thing for the daylight stuff. How much fill in order to make it stand out against that sky and still be able to read what's going on in the sky. Very hard thing for a DP to see in their head. Right. But be able to see something on set that told him what was going on with it. You know, that makes it worth it to him. And there's this whole thing the ASC's been saying now for a decade. It's about the original intent. If he's doing all that and the metadata is getting burnt into the OCF, then his original intent passes all the way through post. Doesn't get handed off somewhere to somebody who may or may not touch his metadata. His metadata is right there with the image.
I agree that people should start with the knowledge they have and not assume a bunch of things. But I do want to listen, we're getting close to an hour and I want to touch on something real quick. You mentioned Copycat, right? And so I want to get into this. And we've obviously talked about some of those revolutionary moments, the electro-mechanical to digital to all kinds of evolutions that happen along the way. But what do you think about now the essentially the AI revolution and the real-time revolution and how it's going to change where we see things going next?
And bottom line is AI to me is machine learning that's just getting faster and better.
Exactly right.
If we don't, and we've been doing machine learning forever. I mean, let's not forget that there was a movie called AI that's like a decade old. Okay, I mean, AI is not brand new.
No,
so it is fixing things that need to be fixed. Okay. Blue and green screen.
What's broken that needed to be fixed that AI can solve?
Well, first, blue and green screen, chroma screens, bad idea. Always has been, but it's been better than not. Okay.
Right.
I mean, rear projection had these issues, and LED screens are better than that, but they're still not great.
Of course.
They still have all the issues that rear projection always had. You know, it's still only that far away, and focus doesn't really work with it, and there's issues of contrast and, you know, all the usual crap. You put smoke in the room and it stops at the wall and everybody can see that. I mean, you know, you know, those issues, Laurel and Hardy had those problems. Okay. We had them on Fight Club, you know, look carefully at T2, lots of rear screen in T2. So
Cameron did a pretty good job of rear screen stuff, man. He was pretty, like, if I look at Aliens and then look at the rear screen, some of the rear screen stuff on Aliens is like really good. Her in the elevator coming down and on the third act was like didn't realize all that was rear screen. It was beautiful.
No, and so that's been around. LEDs just allows you to move the camera with a little bit more facility, but it's got its own issues. It doesn't reproduce reds very well and whatnot. And honestly, I mean, if you know Joe Lewis, you should go down there and look at his museum. He's got one of those old xenon projectors that the Hansers used to use. It's like, I think he's got the only cache of rods for a xenon projector left in the world.
Nice.
Anyway, but these things are just getting perfected. And, part of being in this business is that you eject as quickly as possible whatever you don't need to know. There'll be some residue of how you solve that problem that hopefully sticks around so you can solve another one better, quicker. But the reality is a lot of the stuff that we were talking about earlier, with the line art and all that kind of crap, I hope I never have to resurrect that stuff again. And I hope nobody has to, right? And I think that AI starts to fill in, like, instead of 5 little ladies who used to call themselves the Roto Hags, don't ever have to do that work again, that there's some AI that does it. On the other hand, I think it's still going to be a tool that needs to be, like, training is interesting. And we haven't really made enough of what training is.
Sure.
I mean, right now, everybody's so amazed by the output that they're not noticing how bad it is, how you wouldn't really want to show that to an audience.
Sure.
But like, what's the data set? How do you use the data set properly? How do you make it go? We got to do a lot of that because Copycat was brand new and Foundry was willing to help us. They put a team of like nine people on our show because we were a great use case, right? Yeah. Giuseppe Lombardi was sort of our lead compositor guy on set, and he's a trainer for Foundry, and he was learning how to do it. We went in thinking, if we put little green screens behind extras, maybe that'll help us train it. No, not so much. You train on the thing itself and knowing which pieces to pull, and it's like anything else. It's and so I think the AI thing is only good for us to be able to get over stuff that nobody really enjoyed doing in the first place, and get down to better work. And then, of course, once you get past the sort of strict mechanics, then you get to start playing around with what humans do. We're the only reason we do this is because we're in some advanced society that makes room for us to do it. And what are we really doing? We're just explaining ourselves back to ourselves. Right. And that's what we should be here doing. Yeah. And what can I say? I love all that stuff, and I know it looks bad right now, but it'll get there. I have a couple of directors who are fascinated by it, and that's all it takes is a few people fascinated with how to get what they want out of it. And I don't believe it's going to, it'll replace some people, and it'll, aren't we happy?
Well, a lot of places got replaced, right? I mean, that happens. Yeah. That's the nature of all innovation, is that it replaces things.
I mean, aren't we happy that we're not still using whale oil lamps? I mean, let's be, we want to keep moving down the road and do better things. I
mean, obviously the big concern is if it's stealing other people's work to do it, but that's a different conversation.
I mean, there's this fine line in the arts between plagiarism and honoring someone else's work. I mean, sampling music is, frankly, sounds like plagiarism to me, but if you're paying the guy to use it, then I guess it's okay. Sure. We'll just have to land there somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going through the legal battles as it is, but it's an interesting concept. Well, listen, Kevin, it's fascinating talking to you. I can't wait for Comandante. I think it'll be very, very
I think
interesting.
It's dead and gone. You have to look for it.
You have to look for it. Okay.
I mean, literally, right now, it's a year since Venice when we opened it.
Wow.
It did its run in November of last year in Italy, and I just don't think it's made it to, I think it did Europe already. I don't think it made it here.
Okay. Is it available is it available online yet, or
everybody asks me that? I'm sure it's out there.
Okay. We will be on the lookout for it for sure.
It's just so really Italian. Italians love this movie. I'm not sure how many other people get it. It's like,
Got
it's
it.
really all about food. That's what brings people together.
Well, yeah.
Anyway, you'll see.
Okay, that sounds amazing. Well, thanks so much for being on. And I'm sorry, I'm glad we finally did it. It's been you should have had you on years and years ago. I mean, we were talking about Mike Fink. I mean, Mike's been on as well. It's been really cool. All right, well, thanks so much, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.